Today's culture moment is on Latin literature, and it also gives me the chance to mention that quote I was going to tell you earlier. And now that you know more words, you'll understand it. So we're going to talk about Latin literature. It also ties in with history and also ties in with what you'll be reading later as you get further along in the book. The snippets of what you're going to be reading are actually going to be from Roman authors instead of just the farmer lives on the island or whatever. Anyway, so we're going to start with the board, and the earliest Latin literature we have is from Livius Andronicus. Livius Andronicus. Andronicus. And he's from about 230 BC. And he didn't write an original, but he translated the Odyssey into Latin. Okay, the second person you should know is Quintus Ennius. He wrote the Annals in about 200 BC. And CA is circa, which means about. And a lot of times I do write my abbreviations from Latin. It's just a habit I've gotten. So CA is circa, about. Plautus and Terence, Plautus, and Terence wrote comedy. They wrote plays, but they were comedy. Cato the Elder wrote books on agriculture. And his book, I think, was of agriculture. But of course, the title was in Latin. The Golden Age was actually a lot longer than what we're talking. The Golden Age was divided in two different times, and some people call the first time the Cicero Age and the second time the Augustan Age. So the first part is the Cicero Age, and of course it includes Cicero, of course. And he was the master of Latin prose, and as the board said, he died 43 BC, Cicero. And in Latin, as we know, the C's are pronounced hard, so in Latin that would be Cicero. And Cicero means chickpea, just a little fact. And Julius Caesar was just not a general or a dictator or a consul. He was also an author, and he wrote the Gallic Wars. He also wrote about the Civil Wars. He wrote the Gallic War, and you would probably be reading some of the Gallic War in Latin too. And then Sallust, and of course Caesar would be pronounced Kaiser, going back to that. Sallust, Sallust, was a historical writer. Catullus, Catullus, you stuck around for Latin 3-4, you read a little bit of Catullus, and he writes love poetry. And then the Augustan Age, they were poets and writers that Augustus, which was the first emperor, that he sponsored all these writers, and Virgil was one of them, and he wrote the Aeneid. And that's like an AP Latin writer, so if you had started earlier, you'd be reading the Aeneid, and he also wrote eclogues, Eclogues, eclogues. Horace, he wrote the odes and satires. Ovid, he wrote Metamorphoses, and Metamorphoses talks about the changes. And he wrote mythology, that's what Metamorphoses is, but it's specifically about the changes that occur in mythology. Like, for instance, this character got changed into a boar, or this other character got changed into a flower, and that's what Ovid wrote about. Livy, he wrote, I think it's 142 books about the history of the Roman people, but only 35 of them survived. And then there is, on the bottom, the imperial times. Yeah, I know Augustan time is, but this is after Augustus. We have Seneca, who wrote Natural Questions. Petronius, Petronius. He wrote the Satyricon. Martial wrote Epigrams. Juvenal, Juvenal, wrote satires. Tacitus wrote histories and annals. Suetonius, he also wrote history, but he wrote about the 12 Caesars. So he was writing about the first 12 emperors. Jerome and St. Augustine were Christian writers, and Jerome wrote the Vulgate, which is the Bible in Latin. And he wrote Vulgate because it's written to the people, and that's what Vulgate is, to the common people. And that's about those people. Now, Seneca and Petronius were during the time of Nero, and they had the unfortunate of, the time when Nero decided not only that he was going to kill, well, I'm going to leave this up here while I'm talking. He was going to, I had it up centered a minute ago. He was going to kill the, not only some of the Christians, remember he blamed the fire on the Christians even though he did it himself, so he could crucify and execute Christians, but he also, he was a nasty person. He had his mother killed, but he also had Seneca and Petronius. He told them that he wanted them to kill themselves, and if they didn't, they were going to be killed themselves. So Seneca and Petronius were to commit suicide, and they did. But Petronius did something interesting, and I remember the story Mr. Warren told me about how Petronius, he decided to have a farewell party with his friends. And he would cut his vein, and then he would patch it up, and he'd go party with his friends and say goodbye to them, and he would do it again, and he'd patch it up, and he'd go say goodbye to his friends. So he had a party while he was doing it, which I found really, really interesting. And so if you need to, you pause this, you write it down. I know the handwriting is small, and I tried to spell it so you could get all the words. If you need to call me and ask me about it, you can. Pause, take the notes. I'm going to, in a second, I'm going to erase it and then write the quote I really like. Seneca has some very good quotes, and I'm going to erase and write it down. And the quote I erased might explain why he was one of the people that Nero wanted to have himself killed. Seneca was one of Nero's advisors at one point. He was one of the advisors to not just him, but I believe he also advised Caligula. And so he had a very prestigious office. But one of my favorite quotes from Latin is from Seneca, and I think everybody should do it. You know a lot of these words, but not all of them. And some of them you might want to just memorize it because it's a good quote. You might even want to learn it in English. So, here we go. Sic vive cum habitibus tanquam Deus videat et videt. Sic means so. we have sic means so. Vive, we know viable comes from it. And vive means live. So it means so live. And hominibus, we get homo sapiens from it. So that's man. So live, and you know cum. So live with men. Tanquam, that's a Q if you don't know what that is. Tanquam. As if God sees you and he sees you. So live with men as if God sees you and he sees you. So it's saying, so live with men as if God sees you and he sees you. So it's saying you should live with men as, so live like God sees you, because he does see you, is basically what it says. And it's a really good quote. And I look at that and I think, oh wow, maybe, Christianity was still pretty new even around Nero's time. And so maybe um, Seneca had talked to Paul, and maybe he had learned some things. I don't know if that's true, but the fact that he wrote that he believed in one God, whichever God it was, he believed in one, because that was not plural. So I find that a very potent quote. I really like that quote. Anyway, if you have any questions about Latin literature, that was an overview. There are a lot more authors, but those are the ones you'll probably encounter when we are doing our readings, and I thought you might need to have an overview about it. The next culture, we will definitely be talking about some life. So you've done a little bit of history, you've done the kings. We'll do some more history since you're interested in it. But literature is also part of history. You'll be encountering it. We've talked about some history. We talked about Nero and how it pertained to Seneca and Petronius. We talked about Julius Caesar, how he wrote about the Gallic Wars. He wrote about the Germanic Wars. He participated in both of these wars, the Germanic Wars and the Gallic Wars, and then he wrote about his experiences. And they're pretty interesting. And you might like those when we do get to them, because you will encounter them in Latin too. But I hope you enjoy the video. And voila!